For Ang Zhang-du, the day of the royal wedding was a day for revenge. He travelled to Northampton armed with a knife and murdered a family of 4.
For this man, the best day to kill a family would be the day of the royal wedding. While millions across the United Kingdom were glued to their screens, celebrating the union of Prince William and Kate Middleton in a fairy tale ceremony on April 29, 2011, Ang Zhang-du had other plans. He wasn't watching the televised procession, nor was he waving flags or toasting champagne. Du, however, was boarding a train with a knife in his bag, a passport in his pocket, and murder on his mind. By the time the crowds were cheering in the streets of London, 4 members of the Ding family, Jeff, Helen, 18-year-old Xing, and 12-year-old Alice, were dead inside their Northampton home, stabbed, slaughtered, silenced forever. And this wasn't random, this was a pre-planned revenge, which would spark one of the most intense international manhunts the UK had seen in decades. This is the twisted story of the Ding family murders, and the man who chose a day of national joy to commit a massacre. It was a quiet spring weekend in the sleepy suburb of Wootton, Northampton. Families gathered in gardens, lawns were mowed, windows left open to let in the breeze. But inside one ordinary-looking house on Pioneer Close, silence had settled, and not the peaceful kind. When police finally entered the home on a Sunday evening, what they found shattered the calm of an entire community. A family of 4 gone. No sign of struggle on the outside, no forced entry. Just an eerie stillness and a massacre that had taken place 2 days earlier, right under everyone's noses. Who could have done this, and why? As detectives peeled back the layers, they uncovered a trail that stretched across countries, a years-long grudge, and a killer who vanished into thin air, almost. What pushed an educated businessman to commit one of Britain's most chilling family murders? Stay with us because this might get messy. Inside the modest 2-story house in Wootton, officers found a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned detectives. Jeff Ding, a respected university lecturer, his wife Helen Chui, their 2 brilliant young daughters, Xing and Alice, all 4 brutally murdered. Their lives were stolen in broad daylight, and their bodies left for days. But what was most disturbing wasn't just the sheer violence, it was the precision. Whoever did this knew exactly when to strike. The family had been killed on Friday, 2 days earlier between 3 and 4 p.m., a time when most neighbors were still at work. The streets were quiet and no one would hear a thing. So who would want this entire family dead? The answer came quickly, and it pointed to a man with a bitter grudge and nothing left to lose. Ang Zhang-du. Du wasn't a stranger. He was a businessman from Coventry, and he knew the Dings well. The 2 families had been locked in a long, ugly legal battle over a failed business deal. Years of court dates, rising legal fees, and bad blood. And when Du lost that case, something in him snapped. He drove to the Dings' house in broad daylight, and he didn't leave alone. What happened inside those walls in that one terrifying hour would set off an international manhunt. Because after the killings, Du didn't just disappear. He went on the run. He stole the Dings' rented car and drove to London. From there, he slipped onto a coach bound for Paris, then to France, then Spain, then Morocco. He was gone like a ghost, and for over a year the trail ran cold. Thousands of miles from England, in a half-built, crumbling apartment block in Tangier, a man was hiding. And eventually, someone noticed. Before the headlines, the manhunt, and the bloodshed, there was the Ding family. Quiet, dignified, brilliant. A family that had made a peaceful life for themselves in the leafy suburban calm of Wootton, Northampton. They were of Chinese descent, respected by their neighbors, loved by their community, and adored by each other.
Ang Zhang-du and his wife came to this country from China in 1998. They were both doctors of traditional Chinese medicine, and they started a family, and after a short while they met the Dings. She was a businesswoman and he was a lecturer at university in Manchester.
At the center was Jifeng Jeff Ding, a university lecturer with a calm, scholarly air to him and a deep commitment to his work and family. Beside him was his wife, Helen Chui, warm and reserved, the quiet strength in the home. Together they raised two daughters who were nothing short of exceptional, Xing and Alice. Xing was an academic prodigy. She had already secured a place at the University of Nottingham to study medicine. Her future was bright, carefully planned out with the kind of discipline and brilliance that only comes from raw talent, paired with relentless hard work. In the aftermath, exam boards would posthumously award her 4 A stars in chemistry, Latin, mathematics, and biology, grades predicted from her existing work, which showed just how far she was destined to go. She had dreams of healing, of helping, of making the world a better place. But those dreams never left the house on Pioneer Close. And then there was Alice, only 12, a bright, budding soul with the kind of quiet intelligence that hints at a future full of promise. Like her sister, she was gifted. Both girls were talented musicians, their home often filled with the soft sound of piano keys and violin strings. Music was their language, one of harmony, beauty, and hope. That same home, part of the redeveloped Simpson Barracks, in a peaceful residential neighborhood, had been a place of learning, laughter, and love. Until one spring afternoon, it was turned into something else entirely. Behind the facade of civility, far from the calm of gardened streets and school schedules, a storm had been brewing for over a decade. One that began not with violence, but with a business deal gone wrong. Years before the murders, the Dings had partnered with a fellow Chinese immigrant, Angxiang Du, to run a traditional herbal remedy shop in Birmingham. But things soured. Money, misunderstandings, mistrust, and eventually, lawsuits. It became a drawn-out, bitter legal battle, a war of paperwork and hearings that dragged on for over 10 years. Du and his wife lost, appeal after appeal. By the spring of 2011, the final blow landed, a court order barring Du from disposing of any assets and a looming legal bill of nearly £88,000. Everything he had was slipping through his fingers, and in his mind, the Dings were to blame. The day after receiving that court order, Du disappeared, and what came next would tear a hole through the heart of an entire family and shock a nation. On the morning of April 29th, Angxiang Du woke with a plan and a knife. At 10:44 a.m., he boarded a train from Coventry to Birmingham. In his bag was his passport, in his pocket a blade. And back at home, he left behind a farewell note for his family that read, "Everyone has to say farewell one day." It wasn't a goodbye filled with sorrow, it was a declaration, a quiet, calculated step into something far darker than any of them could have imagined. From Birmingham, Du caught another train heading east to Northampton. It was a journey of less than 2 hours, but it marked the start of something that would spiral into international chaos. By around 1:35 p.m., he was in Wootton, a quiet, modern suburb where nothing ever happened. He got off a local bus near Pioneer Close. Just another face in the neighborhood, just another man walking down a street lined with well-kept homes. No one knew he was carrying a weapon. No one saw what was coming. 2 hours later, at approximately 3:30 p.m., Du entered the home of the Ding family. What happened next was as swift as it was savage. Du found Jeff and Helen Ding in the kitchen. It's not known if there were words exchanged, if they recognized him in that final moment, or if he struck after catching them off guard. But by the time he was done, Jeff had been stabbed 23 times. Helen was stabbed 13 times. their lives extinguished in the very heart of their home, a place where they had raised 2 daughters and built a life of quiet success. But Du wasn't finished. Upstairs in one of the bedrooms, Xing and Alice were likely unaware of what had just happened downstairs. Maybe they heard something. Maybe they didn't have time to react. But what is known is that Du climbed those stairs, entered the room, and unleashed the same calculated violence. Xing was stabbed 11 times, Alice 4 times. The attack was brutal, deliberate, and left no survivors. And yet, amid the horror, a cry for help managed to escape. At exactly 3:32 p.m., a call was made from Alice Ding's mobile phone to emergency services. On the other end of the line, dispatchers could hear the girl's terrified screams. It was a moment that might have changed everything, but it didn't. The call was mishandled by Northamptonshire police. Officers were sent to the wrong address. When nothing was found, the incident was closed. Back in Pioneer Close, 4 lives had already been lost. After butchering an entire family, 2 parents and their innocent daughters, Ang Siang Du didn't flee in a panic. He stayed. In a home soaked with blood and silence, he paused. And then, as if the horror he had unleashed meant nothing, he slept for a while. When he woke up, refreshed and remorseless, Du wasn't done. He took the family's car, a silver Vauxhall Corsa, and drove off. He drove for hours, weaving through the late hours of the evening, eventually stopping at the M1's Junction 15, a service station. The time was 9:43 p.m. There, he purchased a road map of Northamptonshire. This drive was not meant to escape, but to settle one more score. There was someone else on his list, a friend of the Dings, someone who had dared to support them through their decade-long legal war. Someone Du believed had helped finance his downfall. He was out for more blood. But fate had other plans. No one was home. Another loose thread. Another plan that didn't unfold the way he wanted. So he drove on, straight to London, back at the Ding family home. A neighbor crept through the house. Nothing could prepare them for what lay beyond the blue velvet curtain in the back room, the one facing the garden. There, concealed like an afterthought, were the lifeless bodies of Jeff and Helen Ding. More than 48 hours had passed since the massacre. They had been murdered on a day of national celebration, and now, found on a day that would forever mark the neighborhood with grief, the brutal truth of what had happened inside that home was finally and horrifically uncovered. Back to Du on his run from the police. When he was in the capital, he slipped past automatic number plate recognition cameras entirely. Somehow the system failed to catch the vehicle as it entered the city. He ditched the Corsa in the affluent neighborhood of St. John's Wood, parked it like it was just another commuter's car. It sat there, unnoticed for 11 days, collecting 9 parking tickets while police scrambled to piece together what had happened. Detective Chief Inspector Tom Davies, the lead on the case, would later admit just how difficult it had been to track him down. He was a man with a plan, Davies said grimly. He did not hit any radar. Du hadn't just fled. He'd prepared, down to the smallest detail. From the moment he stepped out of his home with a knife and his passport, he knew exactly what he was doing. By the time they realized what they were chasing, Du was already gone. By the time the sun rose on April 30th, Ang Siang Du was already on the move. With blood on his hands and 4 lives behind him, he walked into a coach station and calmly purchased a one-way ticket to Paris. He used his own passport, brazen, unfazed, and seemingly untouched by the violence he had just committed. That same day, his wife reported him missing. Meanwhile, back in Northampton, the horror inside the Ding family's home remained undiscovered. On the morning of May 1st at 8 a.m., police officers knocked on the door of 4 Pioneer Close. They were looking for Ang Siang Du in connection with the missing persons report. but no one answered. The officers didn't force entry. They walked away. Behind that door were 4 lifeless bodies, silent witnesses to a massacre. Later that day, it wasn't law enforcement, but a concerned neighbor who stumbled across the carnage. As the investigation exploded into a murder inquiry, Du was already gone. After slipping into Paris, he began a cross-continental sprint to avoid justice, drifting through France, cutting across Spain, and finally arriving in the southern port city of Algeciras. There he boarded a ferry to Tangier, Morocco. A world away from the blood-stained kitchen and the failed 999 call, Du hoped he could disappear entirely. He made his way to Oujda, a city nestled near the Algerian border, but the illusion of safety didn't last. Moroccan authorities picked him up as a suspected illegal immigrant. For a moment, it seemed like the law might catch up with him. But there was one critical flaw. Nobody knew who he was. With no identification and no link to the UK murders, the Moroccan police let him go. And just like that, Anxiang Du vanished again. He remained a ghost in Morocco for the next 14 months. No one knew where he was until mid-2012, when a tip changed everything. Northamptonshire police had long suspected he was hiding somewhere in Morocco, and as international pressure mounted, they intensified their search. A local newspaper published his photograph, and that photo landed in the right hands. A construction worker recognized Du. He had been living in the shadows of a crumbling, half-finished apartment block. There was no electricity, no running water, just a slab of concrete, a makeshift bed, and a small gas-powered stove he used to cook scraps. From a once-respected businessman to a fugitive hiding in filth, Du had become a man stripped of everything but the memories of what he'd done. On July the 7th, 2012, Moroccan police stormed the building and arrested the man believed to be Anxiang Du. Back in Europe, the investigation had stretched into Spain as well. Officers from Northamptonshire traveled to Madrid, and though they never fully disclosed the extent of their efforts, they believed their inquiries there played a significant role in Du's arrest. But there was still one major problem. There was no formal extradition treaty between the UK and Morocco. Undeterred, British authorities made a formal application through the Home Office, working behind the scenes to secure his return. On July 10th, it was confirmed the man in custody was indeed Anxiang Du, the prime suspect in the Ding family murders. And just over a week later, the case took another unexpected turn. On July 19th, police arrested 4 individuals across England: a 54-year-old woman in Coventry, a 39-year-old in Gloucester, a 22-year-old woman in Southend, and a 25-year-old man in London. All were suspected of conspiring to assist an offender. Each was released on bail as investigators tried to untangle the web Du had left behind. The killer had been caught, but justice was still waiting. After 14 months of vanishing into the shadows of Morocco, Anxiang Du's run had come to a definitive end. On 20th February 2013, the British Home Office, working closely with the Moroccan Ministry of Justice, finally secured the extradition of the man whose name had haunted headlines and devastated a community. He was flown back to the UK under tight security, a man who had crossed borders, continents, and moral lines in the most harrowing ways imaginable. The very next day, 21st February, Du appeared in front of a magistrate's court in Northampton. The charges? The brutal murders of Jeff, Helen, Xing, and Alice Ding. He stood there, expressionless, as the charges were read out. The courtroom, packed with press and shadowed by grief, watched the man whose rampage had destroyed a brilliant family be remanded into custody. Within 24 hours, Du was moved to the Northampton Crown Court. A trial was set for 5th August 2013. a 10-day courtroom reckoning that the Ding family's remaining loved ones and the entire town of Northampton had long awaited. But justice would have to wait a little longer. Procedural setbacks and delays crept in. The plea and case management hearing, where Dew would enter a formal plea, was pushed to 7th May, then 10th May, and relocated from Northampton to Nottingham. Why? Expert availability. The court wanted to ensure that no detail, no testimony, no forensic nuance was left unexplored. But when Dew was finally scheduled to appear in May, a vital piece was missing. A Mandarin interpreter never arrived. Without interpretation, there could be no plea. The court was forced to postpone again. A new date was set for July, and the trial itself was rescheduled for 12th of November, 2013, more than 2 years after the Dings had been slain in their home. On 18 July, Dew once again appeared in court. He said nothing of substance, only confirmed his name. Tests were still being conducted. Still, the full truth had yet to be laid bare. Hopes that a plea would be entered that day dissolved into silence. Finally, on 4th November 2013, just days before the trial, Aung San Dew formally denied 4 counts of murder, and so the trial began. The courtroom doors opened and justice took its first deep breath. The prosecution laid out its case with clinical precision. Dew, humiliated by a decade-long legal defeat and facing €1,000 legal bill, had left his home on that fateful day with a knife and his passport, having already penned a farewell note to his family. He had traveled methodically to Northampton, taken a bus to Wootton, and in a span of minutes had extinguished 4 lives in cold blood. The jury listened to all of that in stunned silence. On the 26th of November, the jury was sent out to deliberate. The next day, 27th November, they returned, less than 24 hours later, with a verdict that carried the weight of national attention. Guilty on all 4 counts of murder. The next day, Dew, now 54 years old, stood before the judge for sentencing. The courtroom, once again packed, heard the final judgment ring out. Life imprisonment. Minimum term, 40 years. A powerful message was sent. Dew would spend the remainder of his life behind bars, with no possibility of parole until he was well into his 90s. It was effectively a death sentence behind cold steel bars. But Dew wasn't done yet. In June 2014, reports emerged. He intended to appeal. His legal team challenged the 40-year minimum, calling it excessive. But the Court of Appeal wasn't moved. In fact, it went one step further, highlighting that even whole-life tariffs, harsher than what Dew had received, had been upheld in similar cases, such as the notorious Jeremy Bamber, who had slaughtered his entire family. Dew's appeal was firmly rejected. The court stated there was no fault in the trial judge's approach. Justice had not only been done, it had been seen to be done, publicly and without compromise. The man who had brought death to a brilliant family, fled the world, and hid among concrete ruins, had now been stripped of everything. But even behind bars, the silence of the Ding family still echoes. 4 lives gone, a future stolen, and a name, Aung San Dew, that will forever be tied to one of the most chilling massacres in modern British history. Among those in the courtroom sat members of Helen Ding's family. They had flown in from China, carrying not just suitcases, but sorrow too heavy for words. They sat through every agonizing detail, the forensic breakdowns, the timeline of terror, the harrowing 999 call that no one should ever have to hear. And as sentencing commenced, the judge paused to acknowledge what the justice system often overlooks, the unbearable emotional toll. I have observed the dignified way in which you have conducted yourselves throughout this trial, he said, his voice steady but reverent. This must have been truly horrendous for you, in a way that the rest of us cannot understand. No words could bring back what was taken. No sentence, no number of years could ever restore the lives lost in that quiet Northampton home. But in that moment, in the solemn stillness of a courtroom far from home, grief was finally recognized, and the world, if only for a second, stood witness to the unfathomable strength of a family shattered, but not broken. Was this truly the end of Anxiangdu's plan, or just the part we ever uncovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.